textile industry was killed through liberalization. And then they brought Mitumba. It killed all our textile industries. Our people are only wearing clothes coming from outside the country. They've been worn by people who are dead. We are going to go to primary production so that our people who are importing mitumba can have good product to sell here. I'm saying that we are not moving anybody out of business. We will ensure that those who are importing mitumba get the first hand to market goods which are going to be manufactured here in this country.
I was thinking the other day when I saw a statement made by a cabinet minister called Moses Kuria, and he indicated that the government is considering banning used clothes from the West from being imported into Kenya in order to encourage the growth of a textile industry. And what was interesting was that before the election, during the campaign season, Raila had also called for the suspension of the importation of used clothing, and majority of the men in Kenya rose up and condemned him simply for calling for an end to Mtumba, used clothing. And his argument was the same. He was like, you want a textile industry. You do not want a situation whereby you are hawkers of used foreign items. You're better off making your own items, and that will create employment and prosperity. And I thought that was a very reasonable position he took. But he was condemned by the men of Kenya. They mocked, insulted, and shouted at him. And I sat back and I looked and I was like, my God, there really is no hope. Because if these are the men of Kenya demanding to be hawkers, demanding that there should be no industries within the country, then how can we escape the poverty and the unemployment that we see? You do not get jobs without factories. I don't know why people don't understand a very simple concept. Factories equal jobs. You have to do things in order to find something to do. If you want to increase the number of jobs, then you need to make things. You need to make cars. Then you get car making jobs. You need to make clothes. Then you get cloth making jobs. You need to make houses. Then you get construction jobs, and so on and so forth. So the more things you make, the more jobs you have within your economy. Like anyone who goes to a developed country, and they will attest to this, during the day in any developed country, you will almost never see pedestrians. You almost don't see anyone anywhere. So you're like, where is everyone? Because as you're walking around, there are no people. Yet the country is full of people. So where are the people? Well, the people are in factories, they're working, they're producing something. Yet when you go to third world countries, there are people everywhere during the day. Because the rate of unemployment is so high, the rate of idleness is so high that as you walk along anywhere, you see vast numbers of people because there are no factories. And so when Raila said, let us have factories, he was condemned by the men of the country. So if you have the men of your country being as senseless and intellectually challenged, like the people who are demanding that we should continue with Mtumba becoming hawkers rather than having factories, then you immediately understand that that country is in trouble. Because if your men want to become hawkers, that's what they aspire to become hawkers. What chance do you have to succeed in an industrialized world? You have almost no chance. Why don't Kenyan men want to produce anything? Because ultimately that is the reason for the poverty. You cannot get people in Kenya to desire to produce anything. I remember they did an interview. I saw an interview of, there was a certain guy, he has a factory, very impressive, and he makes perfumes and things of that nature. And he was being asked by the interviewer, what are your greatest challenges? Is it financing? Is it logistics? What is it? He said, my greatest challenge is if Kenyans, and when Kenyans discover that my perfumes are made in Kenya, they immediately refuse to buy them. So on our package, we have to put something false. We have to say imported from. Once Kenyans see that this item has been imported, then they'll buy. If we write made in Kenya, they will refuse to buy. Isn't that tragic? that the level of self-hatred and self-rejection is so high that if you write something is made in Kenya, guaranteed Kenyans won't buy. Because wanataka ya mzungu. Because everyone is a coconut. Everyone is an African on the outside, but a mzungu on the inside. And so they identify with foreign products and they reject local products. Isn't that a shame? And that is the phenomenon that happened, so that when Raila said we should have our own textile factories and make our own clothes, he was shouted down by the men of the country because they do not want anything written made in Kenya. And so the country continues to be poor. So ultimately, now that the new government is considering banning used clothes from the West and encouraging the growth of a textile industry, then we can conclude that Raila was right. And the tragedy is, once people condemned Raila for wanting factories in Kenya, they automatically refuse to vote for him. Can you imagine? People refuse to vote for you because you want to open up factories, not understanding that prosperity of a nation comes from factories. Value addition, manufacturing, not exporting avocados. That is juvenile. Those are colonial economies that are supposed to have been abandoned in the 1960s, where you sell raw product and you import finished goods. We're supposed to have moved away from that. However, they've, with the new government, I don't agree with everything they're doing, but they're not doing everything wrong. For example, the fact that they've opened up so many factories that had been shut down by KRA is very encouraging, because KRA during the last government went around and destroying every African-owned business. If you're an African and you own a business, they would accuse you of not paying taxes and try and shut you down. While at the same time, British companies are exempt from paying taxes in Kenya because Parliament passed a law saying that they should not pay taxes for the next 25 years. And so the new government has, at the very least, so far, they've opened up a lot of factories that had been destroyed by the previous government, which I think was one of the worst we've had in many, many years. Now, don't get triggered because I'm saying positive things about Raila, because ultimately, we have to deal with situations on the basis of fact and truth rather than emotion or tribal loyalty. Okay? So, for me, I'm able to sit here and say Raila has been right on very many things. That doesn't mean that other people are wrong. No, it simply means you have to give credit where credit is due. The other situation Raila has been right is in his expansion of the democratic space. Now, when people are told that, they really get triggered and they really get annoyed, because they're saying, are you trying to give one person credit for democracy in Kenya? No, not really. But Raila has been quite instrumental in the expansion of democratic space, and you cannot take this for granted, because I want you to think how Kenya got into trouble the last time we got into trouble. How did we end up having KANU as a one-party dictatorship? That happened in 1964. The official opposition crossed over the floor of parliament, in a manner of speaking, and joined the government. In other words, instead of them remaining as the opposition, they sacrificed Kenya, they sacrificed democracy, they sacrificed multipartyism in exchange for money. In other words, they sold our future, they sold our country, and defected into the ruling party. And from that time onwards, we did not have an official opposition. So you cannot take that for granted, because when Raila got the same opportunity to sell out democracy, to sell out the country in exchange for something from the ruling party, he did not do that. He faithfully remained in the opposition. He refused to be bribed, he refused to be bought, he refused to compromise, which is why we have a very strong opposition. And don't remember that when Moi was president, it wasn't clear that democracy would survive in Kenya. People take the situation we have currently for granted. You can't take it for granted, because democracy can fail any single time. And we have seen in many African countries, they finally get a taste of freedom, and then within a very short while, they go back into a very harsh dictatorship. A good example is the revolution that happened, I think, in 2011 in Egypt, where the people rebelled and they finally got multi-party democracy. Yeah, so you can remember that Egypt, after they got multipartyism and everyone thought that democracy will grow and develop, what happened? There was a coup and the country went back to an even more harsh dictatorship. So you cannot take democratic gains for granted. And you need an opposition that has integrity, that will not be compromised to sell out democracy like they did in 1964. And so Raila has been very critical in maintaining the democratic space in Kenya, so that when you on Twitter are able to scream and say anything you want without any kind of fear from the elite that rules the country, it's because of people like Raila. And that doesn't mean that people like Rubia and Matiba and the rest of them are not important. We are not saying that. We are just saying that even after they passed and they gave the torch of maintaining democratic space to Raila, he has kept the fire burning. He's never been compromised. So even while you're attacking him because you don't like him for whatever reason, which is your right, obviously, please remember that your freedom of speech comes from his refusal to compromise with the ruling elite. So let's give credit where credit is due. Raila has been right on many things. He was right on the need of factories. He's right on the need to oppose genetically modified foods in Kenya that, Bill Gates instructed the government that is in Nairobi to feed us with. Okay, because like I always tell you, this country is not ruled from Nairobi. It's ruled from London and Washington. So whatever the Mzungu tells them to do becomes the law in Kenya. Now, if someone like Raila was weak, he would not have opposed GMO. He would have taken the money that was being offered by that Mzungu billionaire. But he didn't. At least he acted with integrity in saying, these foods are dangerous. We will demonstrate. We will fight against them. Which is good for us because we know these foods, they have a lot of toxins. And we know the overall policy is population reduction through, cancer. So we do know that. And he acted with absolute integrity in opposing that policy. So let us give him credit where credit is due. It doesn't mean that you have to support him politically, but it means you need to acknowledge that. It's only fair to acknowledge that. Just the same way we expect other people to acknowledge the role of the Mau Mau in winning Kenya's independence when it happened. We should also have enough integrity to give Raila his credit, or in modern language, to give Raila his flowers while he's still around. So give the man credit.